Our reading this morning comes from Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, one of the most successful African-American writers of the 19th century. Born free, she was active in the causes of abolition, suffrage, and African-American rights for her entire life.
A double standard. Do you blame me that I loved him? If when standing all alone I cried for bread, a careless world pressed to my lips a stone. Do you blame me that I loved him, that my heart beat glad and free when he told me in the sweetest tones he loved but only me? Can you blame me that I did not see beneath his burning kiss the serpent's wiles, nor even hear the deadly adder hiss? Can you blame me that my heart grew cold, that the tempter turned, when he was feted and caressed, and I was coldly spurned? Would you blame him when you draw from me your dainty robes aside, if he with gilded bait should claim your fairest as his bride? Would you blame the world if it should press on him a civic crown and see me struggling in the depth that harshly pressed me down? Crime has no sex, and yet today I wear the brand of shame, while he amidst the gay and proud still bears an honored name. Can you blame me if I've learned to think your hate of vice a sham, when you so coldly crushed me down and then excused the man? Would you blame me if tomorrow the coroner should say a wretched girl, outcast, forlorn, has thrown her life away? Yes, blame me for my downward course. But oh, remember well, within your homes you press the hand that led me down to hell. And so in our sermon today, we are talking about famous UU women. And first of all, I will say that technically none of them were UU, because this was before the Unitarians and Universalists joined to become UU. But since they were either Unitarian or Universalist, we claim all of them as our ancestresses. Patricia Child prepared 2 of these readings and was planning to do them, but she is not feeling well, and Gayla Keesee has stepped up to do the readings on Abigail Adams and Florence Nightingale, so we welcome Gayla.
When considering the Founding Fathers, one name has earned its way into the list which does not receive the praise it should, because it's not a man, it's a woman, and that woman is Abigail Adams. Abigail lived from 1744 to 1818 and was the wife of John Adams, the 2nd president of the newly formed United States. As First Lady, she made frequent public appearances, planned yearly 4th of July parties in Philadelphia, and did all that a First Lady was expected to do in a nation that was still forming. She even gave birth to future President John Quincy Adams. Adams brought the children of brother William Smith, her brother-in-law John Shaw, and her son Charles to live in the president's house during her husband's presidency, because the children's respective fathers all struggled with alcoholism. She was a staunch supporter of her husband's political pursuits and made sure the press looked favorably upon him. So devoted was she to her family's stability that she wasn't even at John's inauguration, because she was dutifully tending to her dying mother-in-law. What Abigail also did very well was to maintain an active, learned, and political correspondence with her husband, John Adams, although history shows she wrote far more than he did. As the First Lady to live in the White House, though only for the last 4 months of her husband's presidency, she was often referred to as Mrs. President, and people used her to contact the president when other means failed. She was self-educated, and as a result, her dedication to learning. She fought tirelessly for the right for everyone, girls and boys, to be educated. She was also an advocate for the property rights of married women, an anti-abolitionist, and above all, believed that women should not submit to any law that did not provide for their best interest. Women, she believed, had far more to offer than to be mere companions for men, and it was her grit that held together the farm and raised her 4 children, purchased land, oversaw tenants, and ran the household while John was away so much. In fact, so enraged was she when their family doctor, Joseph Warren, was killed in the Battle of Bunker Hill that she promptly grabbed all her pewter spoons and melted them into musket balls to distribute among the troops. In 1776, she wrote her most well-known words in a letter to John as he attended the Continental Congress. "Remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could." Yeah. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. The Continental Congress apparently had weightier matters on their minds, and women didn't get the right to vote until 144 years later.
Judith Sargent Murray was born in 1751 in Gloucester, Massachusetts. She was born into a wealthy ship-owning merchant family, and her family was very progressive. Her brother had a tutor, and she had the same tutor, so her basic education was extremely good and a lot better than most women got. Unfortunately, her brother could go to Harvard, and she couldn't. So she was quite upset about that, and for the rest of her education, she was largely self-taught. Her family had a great library. She would read everything she could and do everything to educate herself. When she was 9 years old, she started writing poetry, and her father encouraged her, and he was very proud of her budding writing skills. Her family converted to Universalism, and they were part of the founding of the first Universalist church on this continent, and John Murray was the pastor, and he eventually became her husband. They had a marriage of equality, and she was very, very active in the Universalist church and started a tradition of women having leadership roles in this particular church, when in most other churches, women just sat in the back and cleaned up. And in the Universalist church, she actually wrote a catechism in 1782 and was very involved with the message of hope and love that the Universalists brought. And remember, this was Puritan New England, so this is a much different message that the Universalists shared. Judith was also a playwright, and again, it was New England theater had it's a little bit not quite nice, and Judith also worked to have the stage become more respectable and also using theater as a realm of art and sharing ideas. And this is something where I feel very akin to her, since I also write plays and occasionally films, so having art as ways to share your ideas is very, very important. And she was very instrumental. She died in 1820 and helped to establish a foundation for women to have some role models. And the phrase that I love that she created was she felt like parents should raise their girls to reverence themselves. And that is a message that is still true today for all of us who are part of this church tradition, that we all learn to reverence ourselves.
My next talk is taken from NPR Morning Edition broadcast with Alcott scholar Harriet Reason. Let's get one thing straight about Louisa May Alcott. She's not the little woman you thought she was, and her life was no children's books, says Harriet Reason. For many readers, Alcott is synonymous with her most famous character, Jo March, the spirited sister in Alcott's classic Little Women. Reason said that Alcott's life experience was dark and atypical, but she marketed a more wholesome image. Louisa made herself a brand. She suppressed the fact that she had written pulp fiction that included stories about spies and transvestites and drug takers. Alcott grew up in an extraordinary political atmosphere thanks to her father, Amos Bronson Alcott. He was a forward-thinking educator, and he was friends with some of the most influential thinkers of his time. And yet, he never managed to earn a living or take care of his family. As Louisa put it, he was a man in a balloon with his family holding the ropes, trying to hold him down to earth. He seemed to live on air and in the air and had no concern about earning a living. It didn't seem to bother him that his family was literally starving. Still, Bronson Alcott's friends included the likes of Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry David Thoreau, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and they were frequent visitors in the Alcott home. The March family in Little Women they weren't wealthy, they lived in genteel poverty, but the real Alcott family lived in dire need. They really ate bread and water for stretches, according to Reason. Louisa was hungry, and she worked to rescue her family from poverty. Part of her story is the real Horatio Alger rags to riches tale. From the time she was young, Alcott vowed that she would see to it that her family would not be poor. The high-mindedness of the fictitious March family contrasts starkly with Alcott's real-life motivations. She was driven, for the most part, by the desire not to be poor. She said, "The money is the means and the ends of my mercenary existence." She wrote what she called moral pap for the young because it pays well. Alcott's hospital sketches are a collection of letters she wrote when she served as a nurse during the Civil War in the hospital in Washington, D.C. It was a breakthrough because she wrote what she knew. She'd been writing flower fables, children's stories, and sentimental stories, but hospital sketches were based on this dreadful but fascinating experience she had in the aftermath of the bloody Battle of Fredericksburg. When Alcott left to do her stint of nursing, her father quipped that he was sending his only son to war. Reason said that Louisa May Alcott was not only the breadwinner, a classical role model at the time, but when her younger sister died, she also took on the role as the daughter who does not marry and takes care of her aging parents. Still, in many ways, Alcott was a feminist. She remained unmarried, earned money, and was in control of her situation. "I'd rather be a free spinster and paddle my own canoe," she said. She saw her mother really dependent on this improvident husband. She saw the position of most married women who she felt were marrying as an economic solution. And she said, "I love luxury, but freedom and independence is better." Although many readers associate Alcott with the sweetness of Little Women, Reason said that Alcott's legacy, and Jo March's too, is really about the empowerment of women and girls around the world. Jo March was very flawed. She was a passionate character who did not always do right. She made lots of mistakes and succeeded and drove herself and didn't pay attention to the things girls weren't supposed to do. In her research, Helen Reason came across a comment from a Korean woman who said simply, "You don't grow up to walk 2 steps behind your husband when you've met Joe March." In the time since Little Women was published in 1866, Reason says a countless number of women have, as Alcott put it, resolved to take fate by the throat and shake a living out of her. Oh, look, here comes Florence Nightingale.
Named after the city that she was born in Italy, Florence Nightingale was born into wealth, privilege, and status, sort of the opposite of Louisa, all of which she decided to use to her advantage to gain an excellent education, which included multiple languages, Shakespeare, math, and philosophy. Then, at the age of 16, she felt called to nursing, much to intense anger and distress of her parents and sister, as nursing was seen as a very low occupation, and began her self-education in the field and art of nursing. In 1844, a woman was expected to marry, but Florence felt that marriage would prevent her from achieving her goals, and she was probably right. In 1854, Florence left her post as the superintendent at the Institute for the Care of Sick Gentlewomen in Upper Harley Street, London. And along with 38 female volunteers she had trained herself, including her aunt, and 15 Catholic nuns, she went to Istanbul to work in the British Field Hospital. She was appalled at what she found. Poor care for wounded soldiers was being delivered by overworked medical staff in the face of official indifference. Medicines were in short supply, hygiene was being neglected, and mass infections were common, many of them fatal. There were no equipment to process food for the patients. After Nightingale sent a plea to the Times for a government solution to the poor condition of the facilities, the British government commissioned a prefabricated hospital that could be built in England and shipped to Istanbul. Nightingale reduced the death rate from 42% to 2%, either by making improvements in hygiene herself or by calling the Sanitary Commission to task. Something as simple as hand washing was saving lives, and if the British Sanitary Commission would not listen to her voice, they certainly listened to the results of Florence's efforts. She became known as the Lady with the Lamp, a ministering angel because of her late-night rounds to check on the wounded with a candle lamp in her hand. After the war, Florence made her opinion known that many of the deaths from the Crimean War were due to poor hygiene, lack of decent food, and improper sanitation. Her book, Notes on Nursing, became the cornerstone on the nursing reforms and is still required reading in many nursing courses today. In Florence's day, hospitals were known as places of last resort, with floors lined with straw to soak up blood, a place you went to die. Florence's reforms in nursing changed that, and by 1935, the national life expectancy of a British citizen rose by 20 years. Florence was stubborn, opinionated, and forthright. She was used to getting things done and not backing down. In a time when women in her high social circle did not attend university or pursue professional careers, just marry and have kids, Florence listened to her own voice. Because of her, the practice of nursing was changed forever. Her birthday is celebrated as International Nurses Day, and she was the first woman to be inducted into the Order of Merit.
Olympia Brown was born in 1835 in Michigan. She was born into a farming family at a time when Michigan was still considered frontier, and sometimes frontier territories Women do get more rights because you can't afford to hold people back. You need all of your people at full strength. Olympia's mom believed in education. She built a schoolhouse on the Brown property. And things were slightly better for women in the 19th century than in the 18th. There were a few female seminaries around where women could get some higher education, and Olympia attended Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, but she was a little disappointed because the curriculum was such that, well, women don't need to learn everything, just enough to make them intelligent in conversation. And Olympia was a girl who wanted to know everything. She got accepted to Antioch College, which, again, a little more progressive because it took both male and female students, but they were not held to the same standards. In the speech classes, men had to memorize their speeches while women were allowed to read theirs. Olympia memorized hers. And at Antioch College, she found a calling to the ministry. And again, after a lot of extra hard work, because she was a woman and had to do everything twice as good, she was accepted at the Theological School of St. Lawrence University. There was a lot of opposition from other students. There was also a lot of opposition from the wives of the faculty who were a bit up in arms about their husbands teaching girls. So this is a reminder that sometimes women do get in the way of women's progress as much as men do, so education is an inclusive process. And Olympia, again, through her hard work and doing everything extra that she needed to do, she won acceptance and she needed to be ordained. And the only denomination that would ordain her was the Universalist Church. And again, I think that was probably a remnant of the legacy of Judith Murray by having women in strong leadership, that the Universalist Church did decide to ordain her, and she served as a pastor in Massachusetts, in Connecticut, and Wisconsin. She was a wonderful public speaker, and Susan B. Anthony was also looking for speakers for the suffrage movement, and she recruited Olympia to help speak on women's rights. So Olympia began speaking on that, and eventually in 1887, she decided to dedicate herself to the women's movement, forming the New England Women's Suffrage Association, and worked with many other suffrage groups. And unlike Susan B. Anthony and a lot of the other women, Olympia did live long enough to vote in 1920. She did marry, she kept her name, and she had 2 children who became teachers, and she created an important legacy of female ministry, and now our U denomination has many female ministers. And just as a side note, in one of the films I'm working on is a Western, I've created a character of a female minister, and I had historical precedent with Olympia Brown, and working on getting more female roles in Western has been challenging, so it was good to have a historical role model.
Yeah. How can any woman believe that a loving and merciful God would, in one breath, command Eve to multiply and replenish the earth, and in the next pronounce a curse upon her maternity? I do not believe that God inspired the Mosaic Code or gave out the laws about women, which he is accused of doing. So spoke Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She looks like a sweet little old grandmother, doesn't she? Well, you know she wasn't, right? This woman was, she was feisty. She married a reformer, and I'm going to cut this short because we're running out of time. And I do want to take time to read you her complete women's Bible. Okay, she did not write this just all by herself. She had a lot of other collaborators, and it was reviewed by scholars and whoever, okay? But she did have some very good points. I read it for fun. I would advise you to. She married, she had 7 children, but she was free pretty well to do what she liked. And during up to the Civil War, she was concentrating on some suffrage, but then she got into the abolition movement and eventually the temperance movement. But she was head of the National Women's Suffrage Association, and she held that position for 20 years. She gave lectures, speeches. She even advertised soap. I saw an ad a little while back where she was thinking that women should use fairy soap. So I'm glad to see she got a few endorsements, like some of our women athletes today. But I would like to share just a few quotes from her, and one more quote, because another day we'll talk more about her when we have a little more time, because she's worthy of it. She wrote, "I often saw weary little women coming to the table after most exhausting labors, and large, bumptious husbands spreading out their hands and thanking the Lord for the meals that the dear woman had prepared, as if the whole came down like manna from heaven. So I preached a sermon in the blessing I gave, and you will notice it has 3 heresies in it. Heavenly Father and Mother, make us thankful for all the blessings of this life, and make us ever mindful of the patient hands that oft in weariness spread our tables and prepare our daily food. For humanity's sake, amen." She was a woman to be reckoned with.
And our closing hymn is actually an old